In 1960, two men climbed inside a steel ball and let it sink to the deepest point on Earth. The trip down took nearly 5 hours. They lost the sun in the first 4 minutes. Everything after that was a different world. Actually, it was 5 different worlds, stacked on top of each other, and almost nobody can name them all. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the ocean. It isn't a place, it's a building. Average depth is around 3,700 meters. In the deepest trenches, it goes past 10,000. And as you fall through it, the rules change. Not gradually, but in steps. Light disappears, temperature crashes, pressure multiplies, and at every step, life redesigns itself from scratch to survive the new rules. Scientists split the whole column into 5 official layers. We're going through all of them, top to bottom, and then we're going to keep going. Because there are 2 more layers underneath the bottom, and the last one shouldn't exist at all. Let's start where you already live. Officially, the epipelagic zone, surface down to 200 meters. This is the ocean you have in your head. Blue water, coral, dolphins, surfing, everything you've ever seen in a nature documentary. This thin little strip at the top. And it is thin. If the ocean were a 10-story building, the sunlight zone would be the welcome mat. But it's carrying the entire planet on its back. This is the only layer where there's enough light for photosynthesis, which means it's the only layer where the ocean makes its own food. Phytoplankton, microscopic drifting plants, most of them too small to see, are doing the work. Estimates vary, but somewhere around half of all the oxygen on Earth is produced up here. Not by rainforests, by slime you'd never notice. Everything else in this video eats, breathes, or descends from what happens in this top 200 meters. Coral reefs live here too, and they pull the same trick. Reefs cover well under 1% of the ocean floor, but roughly a quarter of all marine species are thought to depend on them. It's the busiest real estate on the planet. This is also where the ocean's celebrities live. Great whites, bluefin tuna, warm-blooded and built like torpedoes. Sailfish, probably the fastest thing in the water. Whale sharks the size of a bus, filtering plankton with their mouths open. So, bright, warm, crowded, famous. Now here's the uncomfortable part. This layer is about 5% of the ocean by volume. The other 95% looks nothing like this. Officially, the mesopelagic zone. 200 down to 1,000 meters. Sunlight doesn't stop here. It just stops being useful. Not enough to grow anything. Enough to see by? Barely, if your eyes are good enough. And only one color makes it this far. Blue. Which creates the single best design exploit in the ocean. If the only light is blue, then red light doesn't exist. And an animal that's red has nothing to reflect. So down here, being bright scarlet makes you invisible. That's why so much of the deep sea is blood red. Shrimp, jellyfish, squid. They're not showing off. They're hiding. Other animals go further and solve the harder problem. Your silhouette. Look up from below and anything above you is a dark shape against faint light. So thousands of species grew rows of light organs along their bellies, and they glow downwards, matching the brightness of the water above them, precisely, until their outline is erased. It's called counter-illumination. It's camouflage made of light. And then there's what happens every night. During the Second World War, sonar operators kept finding the seafloor at about 400 meters, which was wrong because it was thousands of meters deeper. Worse, the false floor moved. Every evening it rose toward the surface. Every dawn it sank back down. It wasn't the floor, it was animals. Uncountable billions of them, migrating up to feed in the dark and retreating before the light returns. It's the largest migration on Earth. It involves more animals than every land migration combined, and it happens every single day of your life. A lot of that mass is one fish you've never heard of. Bristlemouths, a few centimeters long, mouthful of needles, are thought to be the most numerous vertebrate on the planet. Estimates run into the hundreds of trillions, possibly higher. There are almost certainly more of them than every bird, mammal, reptile, and other fish species put together. The twilight zone also has pockets where oxygen nearly vanishes. And one animal moved in specifically because nothing else could follow. The vampire squid, dark red, webbed arms, glowing tips. Despite the name, it doesn't suck blood, doesn't hunt, and can barely swim. It hangs in near suffocating water and eats the dead stuff drifting down from above, which brings us to the food, because at this depth, dinner falls from the sky. Dead plankton, scales, waste, fragments of everything that dies up top. All of it sinks in a slow, permanent, silent drizzle. Marine snow. It falls forever. And it's the entire economy of everything below this point. Officially, the bathypelagic zone. 1,000 to 4,000 meters. Here, the last photon of sunlight gives up. Not dim, not murky, zero. There's more sunlight in a sealed cave in the middle of a mountain than there is down here. And there has never been any, at any point, ever. It's around 4 degrees Celsius. The pressure would collapse an unprotected submarine. And this is the biggest living space on Earth? By volume, the midnight zone is the largest habitat on the planet. And essentially all of it is empty black water. With no sun, food gets scarce fast, and evolution responds by getting weird. You get the anglerfish, which grew a fishing rod out of its own skull, with a glowing bacterial lure on the end, and which has one of the strangest love lives in biology. In some species, the tiny male bites onto a female and never lets go. Their tissues fuse. His eyes degrade, his organs dissolve, and he becomes a permanent lump on her side, existing only to supply sperm on demand. Some females carry several. You get the gulper eel, which is essentially a mouth that grew a tail. It can swallow prey larger than itself, because at these depths, you may not get a second meal this month. You get the beryl eye, which has a completely transparent head filled with fluid, with its tubular eyes mounted inside it, staring up through its own forehead. And here's the statistic that reframes the whole ocean. In surveys of the deep, something like 3/4 of the animals encountered can produce their own light, which means bioluminescence isn't a curiosity. On a planet-wide scale, it's the normal condition. Glowing in the dark is more common than not glowing. Sunlight is the weird local thing. It's just that we happen to live in the one thin strip that has it. Big animals do come down here. Sperm whales dive past 2,000 meters hunting squid, and Cuvier's beaked whales have been recorded going deeper still and holding their breath for over 3 hours. But they're visitors. They always have to go back up. Officially, the abyssopelagic zone, from the Greek word meaning bottomless. Here you finally hit the floor. And the floor is the flattest, most featureless terrain that exists anywhere on Earth. Abyssal plains cover somewhere around half of the planet's entire surface. Half. This is statistically what Earth looks like. It's covered in a soft ooze made of the skeletons of things that died in the sunlight zone, and it builds up at something like a millimeter every 1,000 years. Scattered across it are lumps of metal called manganese nodules that grow a few millimeters per million years. Some of the objects lying on the abyssal plain right now started forming before there were humans. Life is sparse, slow and strange. Sea cucumbers plow the mud and dominate the biomass. Tripod fish stand on stilted fins facing the current, waiting. Dumbo octopuses flap past on ear-like fins. And there are xenophyophores, single-celled organisms the size of your hand. One cell. No brain, no organs, nothing. 10 centimeters wide. But the abyss also has the two things that break the rules entirely. The first is hydrothermal vents. Cracks where seawater hits magma and comes screaming back out at hundreds of degrees, loaded with dissolved chemicals, and around them, a full ecosystem. Giant tube worms 2 meters tall, with no mouth and no gut, farming bacteria inside their own bodies. Crabs, shrimp, whole crowded cities. None of it runs on sunlight, it runs on chemistry. Before 1977, we did not know that was possible. That single discovery is a large part of why we now take seriously the idea of life on moons like Europa and Enceladus. The second thing is stranger. In some places, dense, super salty water pools and dips on the seafloor and forms lakes. Underwater lakes at the bottom of the sea with a visible surface, actual shorelines, and waves that break when a submarine disturbs them. The brine is so concentrated, it kills almost anything that swims in. There are literal drowned bodies of fish and crabs preserved around the edges. And occasionally, a whale dies and lands here. And that one corpse feeds a specialized community for decades. Sharks first, then worms, then bacteria stripping the bones. There are species that live nowhere else on Earth except on the skeletons of dead whales. Officially, the Hadal Pelagic Zone, named after Hades, the underworld. This layer isn't a continuous sheet, because most of the seafloor never gets this deep. It exists only inside trenches, long narrow scars where one tectonic plate is diving under another. All of them together make up a tiny fraction of 1% of the ocean floor. The deepest is the Challenger Deep, in the Mariana Trench, at roughly 10,935 meters. Drop Everest in. The peak wouldn't reach the surface. It'd still be about 2 kilometers underwater. Pressure down there is over 1,000 times what you're feeling right now. Around 8 tons on every square inch. The water itself is measurably compressed. And things live in it. Amphipods, pale, blind, shrimp-like scavengers swarm anything that lands, in numbers that look like a special effect. One trench species reinforces its shell with aluminium it extracts from the sediment. Sea cucumbers. Snailfish, which are pink, translucent, and look far too delicate to be the toughest vertebrates on Earth. But here's the part I find genuinely eerie. There appears to be a hard ceiling on how deep a fish can physically go. And it's chemical. Deep sea animals load their cells with a stabilizing compound called TMAO to stop the pressure from crushing their proteins into uselessness. The deeper you live, the more you need. But go far enough, and you'd need so much that your body fluids become saltier than seawater, and the whole system fails. The predicted limit lands somewhere around 8,200 to 8,400 meters. In 2022, a snailfish was filmed at 8,336 meters, right on the line. Nobody has ever found a fish meaningfully below it. The ocean has a floor, and life has a separate one, and life's is higher. Below that, it's invertebrates and microbes only. That's the end of the road. Except it isn't. When drilling ships punch through the seafloor and keep going, hundreds of meters of rock, then a kilometer, then 2, they keep pulling up cells, living ones, bacteria and archaea, sealed inside sediment and rock, some of it buried for millions of years. They have been found more than 2 kilometers beneath the seabed, in ancient coal deposits, in water that hasn't seen the surface since before mammals existed. And they barely live. Starved of energy, some of these organisms are estimated to divide on timescales of centuries, possibly millennia. A single cell down there might have a slower metabolism than a rock has a weather pattern. Estimates of how much life this deep biosphere contains vary enormously, and honest researchers hedge hard. But the plausible numbers are absurd. A serious share of all the microbial life on the planet may be living underground, in the dark, doing almost nothing, forever. There's more biosphere below the ocean floor than there is ocean. One more. In 2014, researchers examined a battered little diamond from Brazil, commercially worthless, scientifically enormous. Trapped inside it was a mineral called ringwoodite, which only forms hundreds of kilometers down, in a region of the mantle called the transition zone, and the ringwoodite was wet. Around 1% of its weight was water, chemically bound into the crystal structure. Now run that outward. The transition zone sits roughly 410 to 660 kilometers below the surface, and it is enormous. If even a fraction of it holds water at that concentration, and this is genuinely contested, so take the numbers loosely, then there may be as much water locked inside the rock beneath your feet as there is in every ocean on the surface. Possibly several times more. It isn't a sea. There are no waves, no fish, nothing swimming. It's water held inside stone. Under pressure, you can't intuit. In the dark, permanently. But it means the largest body of water on Earth might not be on Earth's surface at all. So, 5 official layers. A 6th underneath the seafloor, full of things that are alive by the loosest possible definition. And a 7th hundreds of kilometers down, made of rock that's technically damp. You have never seen the ocean. You've seen its lid. If you want the other side of this, what happens when you go up instead of down? The atmosphere has layers too, and the top one is technically thousands of degrees, while also being cold enough to freeze you. That one's next.